Hey everyone, I'm very excited today with our host, Sam Thiara. He's an amazing speaker, coach, and he's taught me a lot, honestly, for the little time that I've known him. His tagline is "Everyone's life is an autobiography, and make yours worth reading." So, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I think, Adam, the best way for me to describe myself is that there are five things that guide and direct me in life: servant leadership, story sharing, activator igniter, champion enabler, and community do gooder. As a result of those five components, I'm able to help individuals, organizations, education, and nonprofits to really try to excel and be the best they are. But also, those five components have really activated and made me into a speaker and a storyteller, a mentor coach, a writer and author, entrepreneur, problem solver, and a community activator. But the whole idea behind it is all of these components that I've realized were integral in helping me realize this journey that I'm on and to provide me fulfillment.
So that's awesome. You recognized the things that drive you and that
Mhm.
resonate with you the most, and then you double down on those to be like your truest self and fulfill your purpose
Mhm.
and your passions. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I actually did the exercise as well that you gave, and I had some I was very creative. That was one of mine. I also like community work.
Mhm.
Um, just giving back and sharing with the
Right.
community. And I think I'll leave it at that. I don't I don't think I remember the last two.
But equally at the same time, what eventually happens is you get, because they're so fresh and new, don't be afraid to change the words around or play around with it. But once they become very anchored into your life, what's great though is they suddenly help you to really visualize clarity and the path that you're on. So it's great that you've already started focusing on this. And like I said, it's like you'll see that it's going to provide you some clarity.
That's awesome. So I want to talk to you
Mm-hmm.
about coaching and what is coaching? And
Sure.
there's there's this thing that you say about being a difficult monk. Maybe you could explain that as well. I just love that term so much.
Yeah. So over the last 20 plus years, I mentor and coach 3 to 8 people a week. And oftentimes individuals come to me seeking the answers, or they think that by coming to me, they're going to seek the answers to life and that I'm just going to tell them. So they see me as this orange saffron bearded man on top of a mountain, all wise. And, I've had people come up and say, I want to be an entrepreneur. What business should I start? And I'm like, well, look, if I knew what business to start, wouldn't I be doing that now? Or, you know, my parents want me to do this career. I want to do this career. Tell me, what should I do? And when I refer to the term of being a difficult monk, people come to me to seek the answers. But I'm going to be very difficult because I am not going to tell you the answers. Instead, what I'm going to do is ask a lot of questions. And the reason being is the answers that you seek actually lie within you. And being the difficult monk, meaning I'm not going to answer the questions, but I'm going to ask questions, people come to realizations. And the reason I like to do this is, number one, I'm not imposing my perspectives, my views upon people. And the second part is when someone realizes the answers that lie within them, all of a sudden they own it because they came up with it, as opposed to me imposing it or suggesting it. The only way that I would say that the importance of coaching comes in with coaching and mentorship, I see them as related, but they are different. If somebody has no idea of the direction, and maybe this is the five core elements piece that we talked about right at the beginning, I help them vision in that regard. So asking a lot of questions and trying to figure out who they are. So once they know who they are through introspection, reflection, and questions, we can then shift to mentorship, which is, okay, now we know, who you are. let's start focusing on what you want to do. And now I can be the guide and say, well, maybe I should connect you to this person, or have you thought of looking at, this type of industry and see if that resonates with the 5 core pieces. But also I find with mentorship and coaching, both of them, I find that I don't do a structured program. In fact, mine's very organic. I don't, whenever we have these conversations, they emerge. And my first question to people is, what would you like to talk about today? Because sometimes it's about career, sometimes it's about life, sometimes it's about relationships, sometimes it's about academics. And there are times where I weave in. So even if we've done the coaching bit and now we're sliding into the mentorship role, sometimes all of a sudden we meet and they're like, Sam, look, I just, wanted to talk about this. And we suddenly weave back to coaching. So I'm very organic in that. But just think of coaching as inquiry, asking questions, and the mentorship part is more the support and guidance piece.
Just being able to contribute to that, and you said that that's something that you get energy from, and that you love doing, so that's just amazing. um i'm I'm thinking of stepping into a role similar to that, um as I'm trying to find more outlets to share my passions as well, and follow that path. I also have a question for you about
Mhm.
the power of story.
Right.
Now, um, like you're talking about many different things, and I love that you always relate it back to your personal experience, which makes it seem very genuine, and
Mhm.
we're genuine ideas here. Um, yeah, so
Mhm. Well, and with storytelling, I think uh, everybody has stories. And I try to pull the stories out of people. The idea that's with storytelling is, I mean, our history is oral. Everybody has an oral history, and information is always passed down. So storytelling is really important because what I have found, whether I'm teaching a class, whether I'm mentoring or coaching or doing a workshop, stories capture the imagination, stories capture attention, but it also is easier to retain. I mean, if I got up and I just spewed facts and data and details and said that the result is this, they're not going to remember a lot of it except, well, he said this. Instead, what I like to do is put it into the form of a story. And for example, on Thursday, I'll be speaking at a workshop on personal branding, relationship management. And I've got 3 stories of successes for relationship management and how important it is in that regard to build these relationships. But all 3 of these are stories. And at the end, then I can ask the question, but what did you pull from these stories as a result of me sharing this? And it allows them the opportunity to then realize the essence of those stories. And oftentimes when we read a book or read a story or listen to a story, uh, everybody has different ways that they may picture or view the story, uh, besides the author who maybe writes the story. So storytelling, I think, is within us, and everybody has stories. But my first TEDx speech was on storytelling, and it was about how do you discover the extraordinary in the ordinary? And what I mean by this is we go through life in autopilot. In other words, we're going through life doing our routines. We wake up, we do our routines, we get ready for work or school, and we go in that direction. And it's like autopilot. But what I've said is embedded in the ordinary as we think of it are these tremendously extraordinary experiences. And sometimes it just means, maybe taking a little bit of a detour, or maybe it's adding a little bit of something extra and seeing what happens. But the way that I say that storytelling can emerge and that we have the capacity to do this, and I talk about in my first TEDx speech, was this concept of CARPE. Carpe diem is seize the day, but CARPE is what I do to capture stories. And what CARPE stands for is Curiosity, appreciation, reflection, perspective, and experience. Curiosity is really important because that's the initial step that starts the story, because curiosity is where you stop and you suddenly, there's something about this that stops you.
Like,
Appreciation is,
oh, I find that interesting. Like, like
yeah,
you're a curious George, and that's how
yeah,
you find things that you like. Like even for me, certain things like I really like Batman. So and like I see, the themes that I relate to, and then I can relate those themes back to my own life,
right.
which is just
Yeah.
so amazing through a story.
Well, no, and that's the best part, because curiosity is what stopped you to think about it. And then the second part is appreciation. In other words, once you stop and for whatever reason, then you can start appreciating it for more than what it is. And you start adding purpose and meaning to it through R, which is reflection. Perspectives is the P, which means we all have our own different perspectives. And we bring our perspectives in to add substance to what we've just curiosity, appreciation, and reflection. And the last one is E, which is experience. If we don't catalog our story and capture it as an experience, your story is going to die an untimely death. And it's never to be shared, never to be remembered, never to be seen. And I'll give you a quick example of how the capturing of it, of the or extraordinary in the ordinary, happens. So of a number of years back, I was going to the university. I was going to go teach my class. And as I was about to enter the building, the door was propped open with a wooden wedge doorstop. So I stopped and I looked at this wooden wedge doorstop. And that's the curiosity bit. Something stopped me about that wooden wedge doorstop. And then I was looking at it and I was appreciating it for more than what it's doing and more than what it is. So that's the appreciation. But I'm standing there and I start reflecting on that wooden wedge doorstop and what it's doing. And I'm sure that the people in the offices around there are wondering, why is he just standing at the door and looking down? Like, is he okay? So I started reflecting on it and I started looking at perspectives and adding purpose and meaning to this reflection. And it suddenly made me realize that that doorstop, propping that door open, is very reflective and representative of the people around me who have helped me in my life, who have held the door open. So maybe I've got many doorstops in my life that have propped the door open for me. And I captured that as an experience so that I can then share that as a story about mentorship and coaching and the importance of how we can help and support people and how we can be that doorstop for other people in their lives. But that's how you convert the ordinary into the extraordinary.
And all it took was a little,
Mhm,
just a little focus, just paying attention to
mhm.
yourself and what's going on, just being present. And
Yes.
yeah, that's amazing. And stories are really powerful. I mean, what you're saying about oral tradition, we should actually, I think we should all try to do this more, like even just tell stories, and it's a good skill to have,
Right.
even if you're teaching, if you're doing public speaking, you can engage people,
Yeah.
or even just to have fun and relax. uh,
Yeah. Well,
Sitting
and
around
it
the campfire is
totally.
and telling stories, that's just a very
Yeah.
magical experience.
Well, and it also relates to the fact that it engages us in conversation with each other as well. Because what happens is when you have that conversation, you start layering story upon story upon story. And, that's a beneficial piece as well, because it doesn't have to be awkward or difficult with regards to what am I going to say here. I always say, listen and observe, like ask a simple question and listen to what their responses are, and then start adding your story into what maybe once they finish, and you just layer in and support each other's, and before you know it, it doesn't even have to be anything significant, but you're just having a really great conversation. I mean, yesterday I had a 25-minute conversation, but that lasted for 1 hour. because again, we just kept talking about, it was an opportunity to do a speaking opportunity. And yeah, they said, well, we're going to be doing a 25, 30-minute conversation. But after the formal part ended, we went for an additional 30 minutes and we could have gone longer. But then we just said, I know that they had other things that they had to get done. I was like, okay, you know what, let's just, and they're like, okay, but we'll talk more. And even when I'm doing all these podcasts, uh, the hosts are often saying, look, we have to get you back, or yeah, maybe, maybe another day, let's just grab tea and have a virtual tea catch up. Because again, it's just that whole aspect of sharing and having a conversation.
Yeah. And funny you say that. Just the other day, last Saturday, I run this discussion group for guys. So we were talking, and I usually have a topic and a slideshow, and what I do is uh, I let them submit their thoughts. I ask a question about a topic, and then they submit their answers. So then everybody gets a turn to talk, and then we go into like a kind of a more loose conversation. But we didn't meet up for the past couple weeks, so I decided, okay, let me just go with whatever, because I was busy too, so I didn't have time to make a slideshow and everything. And we just started talking, and we saw themes of very deep stuff, trauma, and maybe relationships with your parents. And we actually had a very healing, very open conversation, which was just amazing. And we moved to different topics, and I said, guys, it's been 2 hours, right? So I'm not going to obligate any of you guys to stay, but let's go longer. And we did. And one of these guys, he really opened up about something that was really bothering him, and that was just a very good opportunity for him to confront that and deal with it in an open space.
Yeah, and you created that space where they felt comfortable. And there, I'm all about acronyms, but another acronym I came up with was about mental health. And I said that it starts with us. So whether someone is going through a challenging time or you're supporting someone going through a challenging time, starts is what we need to do. And START stands for support, because we need to create a supportive environment. By having this opportunity, it becomes a supporting environment. And out of the supporting environment, trust established, because they trust you, you trust them, and then you can have that depth further going into those conversations. I find that anybody who's going through a challenging time stops appreciating. So we need to appreciate even the little things in life. So S is support, T is trust, A is appreciation, and R again goes back to reflection. To appreciate, we need to reflect and to add purpose and meaning to it. The second T in STARTS stands for talk, the art of conversation. Because once you create a supportive environment, there's trust and appreciation, reflection, and the stories start to emerge. You can actually have the conversations, which is talks. And then the last S means if we go through this whole process, we emerge out of this with strength, and that's the S. So STARTS, I think, is a really great way. And somebody just yesterday said, you're always having these acronyms, and is there a reason? And I said, because I find that if I was to just go through and spew out the details, and you could use maybe related words and stuff, but I said, by saying it starts with you, it's easy for you to capture the essence of all of those pieces because it relates to an acronym. Yeah.
Exactly. And I just love the last word, strength.
Mm-hmm.
So after all those steps, that's the takeaway. We're stronger, and that's good to remember.
Yeah.
I think it's so amazing how you were talking about transformations versus transaction, and we're just talking about relationships with people. So I thought it's just a great time to bring that up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that again, it goes back to the ordinary and the extraordinary, because we go through life and it's just transactional. We'll go to a coffee shop. Hi, how are you? Good. How about you? What do you have? And then you just sort of say your order. Thanks very much. And you move on. you go to, the store, the cashier, or, just anything we do is very transactional, but there's ways that you can actually be transformational. And it doesn't have to be this epic change. It's just little things. I had a student in my class, and, really good student. And, at the end of the lecture, she would get up, and one of two things happen when you teach a class. You either have to move away from the door so you're not stampeded by the students rushing out, or, you know, students are going to come and ask you questions. And I remember that, a couple of students would be coming to ask me questions, but every single lecture, Lisa would quietly pack her stuff away, and she'd be by the door. And as I'm answering these questions, I just glanced to the door, and Lisa was standing there. And as soon as our eye contact happened, she just said, "I just wanted to say thank you for today. I really enjoyed the lecture, and I hope you have a good week." And she did this every week. And I remember in the last week, she came up. Well, we basically, I ended the lecture with some motivational thoughts and ideas, as I always do. And she came up, and I said, Lisa, I just wanted to let you know that by you standing at the doorway and saying thank you really meant a lot to me." And she was like, "Really? I didn't even realize." And I said, that's the little piece of transformation. Another quick example I can share with you is I had about 20 of my students, and we were in Toronto. And it was late at night, everybody was hungry, we went to Chipotle's. And I was the first in line. And as we walked in, again, transaction would be the attendant or the person there would say, "What would you like?" And you give your order or tell what you want, and she moves along.
Very robotic.
Totally, whether as the customer or as the person who's serving. But again, I looked at her and I said, and I saw her name tag, it said Mary. I said, "Oh, Mary, how long have you worked here?" She goes, "Well, 3 years. I said, "Mary, I eat everything. Why don't you make me what you would eat?" And she looked at me and she goes, "Are you serious?" And I said, "Yeah, make me what you would eat." And she was like, "Oh," and this little smile appeared on her face. And she pulled out the tortilla shell, and she just sort of sat, and then she put it there and she says, "Do you want black beans or brown?" I said, "Mary, which beans do you take?" And she said, "Well, black." I said, "Okay, put the black beans and don't ask me again. And if you have a problem with this, I'm coming around to the other side and I will serve myself." And now she started really smiling, and she started going along, and she yells to the cashier, "I'm going to comp this guy's guacamole." And I see my students are all smiling and talking, and the cashier smiling. She started putting so much stuff into this burrito, she couldn't even close it. And she was laughing. And then her cashier tried to close it, couldn't do it. The manager came from the back, and, he tried closing it and couldn't. And we all just smiled and laughed. But it's what she said at the end. She goes, "Man, this was fun. Thanks so much." And that's what I mean by transformation. It doesn't have to be epic. It's just little things that we can do that has an impact on people. And next thing you know, like, especially I found that if you are in that approach and transformation, I never do it because, oh, what can I get out of this, or any of those types of things. But there are benefits as a result of this, because of the fact that you're authentic, you're treating people with dignity, with respect, and they just want to go out of their way for you. I mean, it may result in an extremely large burrito that can't be closed, but that's not the intention. That's not why I did this.
That's awesome. I love that story.
Mhm,
It seems that you like to follow your intuition.
mhm.
How do you listen to that voice?
Well, I think the more you are comfortable with yourself, and not cockiness, but confident with yourself of who you are, that allows you to then venture into a direction. Because it's almost like, what I see is a lot of people going into battle, but they're not sure what weapons they have, and they're not sure if they're even loaded, or is this going to break down or not. But what I've done is I have fashioned my weapons by myself. I know exactly who I am. I know exactly what's important to me. And that's how I can move forward, because of that level of confidence. And again, that's what I really do share with people is how do I help and support their confidence building so that there's clarity for them and that they're able to move forward and then able to acknowledge and recognize. Uh, and that intuition, it's not as pure intuition that you would say. I think the intuition taps into those things that lie that I've been able to realize, and it tells me, yeah, this is where you can go this way, or you shouldn't do this, and it opens it up.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm just taking that all in right now. Yeah, intuition. I love, there's something so freeing about just knowing who you are and what you're all about, because
Mhm.
you can just go through life and be like, okay, you know what? I have this problem. I know this solution isn't for me, but this one works very well. So because I've know this happened in the past. So then
Mhm.
you can just move forward, and it's just kind of it's faster and it's more
Mhm.
fun.
Yeah. Well, and Adam, I mean, I've always said, and one of my other signature quotes that I live by is, obstacles are the necessary bricks on a road to success. I think people fear the obstacles, people fear the outcomes or potential outcomes. And as a result, they may not go down a direction because of that fear. With me, I thrive in ambiguity and uncertainty. And I know that's not everybody. In fact, not a lot of people really thrive in that space because of that uncertainty. But again, I think what is important in that regard is not senseless risks, but I go down that pathway because I realize there's going to be obstacles. And instead of fearing the obstacles, I embrace the obstacles so that it goes back to what you've just said. Because when things don't work out the way you want it, or, you know, the realization is maybe it wasn't what it was meant to be, I get back up again, I dust myself off, but I ask myself, what am I learning from this outcome? And it makes me stronger. I now know better what maybe not to do or try it this way in the future. So that's where I think it's really important that obstacles are the necessary bricks on a road to success, and don't fear the obstacles.
Yeah, resisting, like being attached to a certain outcome is not the best idea, because then you're just expecting, you're just being pretty entitled. You're like, I this will happen, right? Because I maybe you do deserve it, but that's not always the way that it's going to happen, right? So being open to different things happening and not resisting a certain outcome, because the joy not only comes from the end goal, but also the process.
Yeah, it's the journey. I've always said the journey is really the important part, but everybody is focused on the destination. By being on the journey, think of it as being on a train. You're just okay looking at your watch going like, okay, when do I get, to that place, that career, that position, not realizing the journey is the most important part. And if you're not focused on the journey, what if you're on the wrong train? Right. Whereas with me, I'm looking out the window, and you know the journey for me is really the most important part. The end result, I mean, once it arrives, maybe it arrives, I don't know, but the journey is actually the part that we need to embrace, because that's the part that guides and supports where we're going. And like I said, if you're focused on that final destination, are you even on the right train? Because all you're looking at is the end goal. Yeah.
And especially like when I think about that in terms of careers, you see people who have switched career paths and they had no clue that was going to happen. They were set
Mhm.
on this one thing. But something that I always hear is that they translated whatever experience they had on that journey for their first job
Mhm.
to what they're currently doing. And I think that's just awesome. I'm trying to use that philosophy. There's many different pathways,
Yep.
and none of them are necessarily wrong as
Yeah.
long as you're learning.
Yeah. And it's the journey. And I've had students come to me saying, "Oh, I've just wasted 2 years of my life in engineering and realized that's not what I want to do." And I said, "Oh, so when you were in engineering for 2 years, you basically just sat there and fell asleep at the desk. You didn't learn anything, right?" And they're like, "Well, no, I really learned, but it just isn't going to help me in life and career." I said, "No, actually, these are the stepping stones. And no matter what you do, there's always something to gain from this because it'll give you a different perspective. Maybe you're going to have a better appreciation and understanding of the engineers that many people who've never been exposed to engineers wouldn't even realize. You've been given an opportunity to bring this in. So it's always about this idea of instead of looking at what you've lost, always focus on what you've gained. And I think, unfortunately, we're always too guilty of what we've lost. In other words, uh, people will say, by doing this, I won't be able to do this. And they focus on what they've lost. Uh, I always say, but instead, let's focus on what you've gained. I remember when I was working in road safety in a corporate job, when I left that position and was now venturing out, and I had a severance package that I voluntarily took, I looked at it. And because I had built a lot of good relationships with different police departments and police forces, I had about 5 different police departments contact me saying, "We'll fast track your application." And I considered it, and I was really, even the superintendent said, "I've got it here, and I will personally fast track this because we'd like to get you on the force." And I looked at it, and it was really appealing. But then a job working on the Olympic bid committee came up to get the games to Vancouver. And I suddenly thought, man, this is going to be an amazing ride. So I took that opportunity, and it was an amazing ride. Like, we worked so hard, and when we won it and the games had arrived in Vancouver, like, we were in our element. And then I got to SFU, where I've been able to do so many amazing things now. But I don't sit in regret that I never became a police officer. I value and appreciate those who have gone down that pathway, but I don't look at what I lost. I focus on what I've gained as a result. And it's a glimmer of what I gave up, but it never consumes me because of the things I undertook. And one thing I've shared with people, it's a blog post that I wrote, and I've written about 170 so far. I'm about to write another one, is this idea of had to do, have to do, want to do. The first job out of university, corporate culture, pay, benefits, none of this is going to matter. I just need a job. So you take that job. And again, sometimes it has nothing to do with your life or career or what you studied. And, you sit there going like, yeah, I just have to pay my dues, pay my fine, and maybe I'll move to a better job. Well, that's the had to do. Have to do is 5 years later, I'm having conversations 5, 10 years later with people to say, what do I have to do to get to my want to do? But I'm not sure what my want to do is. So it's about, again, that guiding and supporting piece. But no matter what you do, what are you embracing? What are you learning in any opportunity that emerges in front of you? Because all of this is going to help you on that journey.
Yeah, I think that's
Mhm.
how you really become a winner, when you take the positives from things. And you were saying that you thrive in uncertainty, and I think that also might be one of the reasons.
Mhm.
So a lot of people are interested in business,
Yep.
and you see a lot of people also want to be an entrepreneur like me.
Mhm.
But I know you've also mentioned something called intrapreneurship, and
Mhm.
I personally have never come across that term before you mentioned it.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So yeah, I think entrepreneur people have an idea and a sense of what an entrepreneur is. Intrapreneur is basically when you go into a structured organization or a larger organization, and they've carved out a place where they allow you to be creative and they allow you to risk. In other words, they allow you to be entrepreneurial within the confines of a structured organization. And the example I'll give you, which was Simon Fraser University, where I teach right now. For the first 8 years, I was hired with the sole purpose and idea, engage the students. Students are going to class and going home, but nobody is sticking around. Nobody is engaged. So they said, here's a budget, engage the students. And they allowed me to build whatever I wanted to. And I built what I call the 5 pillars of student engagement, which focused on the club activities. It focused on academic case competitions, conferences, international exchange, and student development. So I found that, I had about 30 to 40 initiatives every semester, and I had this big, huge, massive whiteboard. And as things were happening, I'd be putting a line through it, or getting my co-op student. I said, okay, you've earned the right to put a line through that one. We've done that one now. And but you got to build, and nobody was there to say you can't do it. They said, okay, as long as, hey, students are getting engaged. But the important part is we saw a culture shift, which is really difficult to do, but we saw a culture shift of disengagement to now students are engaged and involved, but they don't know the roots of where this came from. So the intrapreneur is looking at a structured organization that gives you that freedom, the space, the budget to be an entrepreneur within the confines of that organization. And I've had about 2 or 3 situations where that's happened, and they do exist. But again, I think you have to be the right person for that. And equally, the organization has to have a level of trust in you to be able to activate upon it.
That's awesome. And I love that example that you shared, because I've personally tried to make change with student engagement, and it is very difficult. And having support, I think, is the main way you're going to go about doing that. You're not fighting against everyone.
Well, and
Yeah.
what I found, the biggest activator in this was not me imposing upon the students that this is what you have to do, but actually getting the students involved. I mean, I remember there was a first year student that came to my office and sat down. He says, I want to do academic case competitions, but where do I get experience? And I was like, oh, you're right. So I went home that night and I built the rules for an academic case competition for first, second year students, just because I had the freedom to do it. And then all of a sudden, this academic competition is still running, probably about 10, 12 years after the fact that I created it. And the funny part is, students have no idea that I created it. And that's totally fine. I don't need the credit on that. But it's always so interesting to hear students talking amongst themselves, or they're talking and they're sharing with me that, yeah, I'm going to go do peak performance and I'm excited about my first case competition. And inside you're going like, yeah, I mean, it was amazing to have built that years ago and to see that it still exists. It's very rewarding.
And yeah, leaving a legacy is the true marker of something that was truly successful.
Oh yeah. And there's a number of things, and you hear about it. I mean, there are times where there's clubs that I got to create with the support, or the students created it, but I was there activating upon it. And you get invited to events, and they're like, okay, and here, this is our club, and here's the event. They send you an email, and they'll explain the whole event, and then you're sitting there going like, yeah, I mean, do you realize I founded this organization with 2 other students back maybe 14 years ago? Again, they don't know where the roots and the origins are, which is totally fine. But again, just that smile happens, going like, wow, this is still going on, and people are still, doing great things.
That's awesome.
Mm.
How would you leave a legacy? How do you ensure that it still continues after you?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, number one, put the ego aside. it's the greater good. It's not you, it's the greater good. And I think that it was more of handing the keys over to the students. And I was fine with not having the credit for it. I just handed the keys, let them build it. And then the continuity starts to happen because others start watching and observing. But one thing that I was always suggesting, guiding, supporting is documentation, the handover of this information, the uh, connecting of the dots and things like that. Because as long as you can ensure there's continuity, eventually people don't question, why are we doing this? Which I think people should question. Why are we doing this? Instead, there's just, the handover and you just carry on. I hope that they modify, uh, reevaluate, reassess, retool, rebuild. But equally at the same time, I think the handover, I think, is really important. And in there is ingrained in the processes of that. So I've always said the sustainability of a club or a competition rests with the students, not with me, because like you say, the essence of that success is if you pull me out, do things just spiral outward and down and out? Or is there this perpetual now motion? And then it's almost like walking away from something, going like, okay, it's working. I'm just going to step back now. And it just keeps on working. You're like, perfect, like a finely tuned machine.
It just reminds me of like a society, like
Mhm.
you start like they start writing down documenting the laws and whatever discoveries, scientific discoveries, and that's kind of how a civilization. So it's like kind of like a mini
Mhm.
civilization that's
Yes,
just been growing.
totally.
So fun to just think about that. So
Mhm.
I think I'd like to move more to like a wrap up now. I
Sure.
think I think it's very interesting, like uh going back to your homeland.
Mhm.
And like in Islam, there's this thing called Hajj. So it's a
Yes.
pilgrimage. You go back to Mecca and you perform rituals and uh it's a very spiritual time. And each person is supposed to do it at least once in their life if they have the means to.
Yeah.
And it's I've seen this. I know Malcolm X, when he went for Hajj, he transformed his life.
Mhm.
Um, he kind of found out what he was missing. And even someone like Dave Chappelle, the comedian,
Mhm.
uh, he he realized when he was burning out doing his first I think first two seasons of Chappelle's show.
Mhm.
He's like, these guys are just milking me. He actually made a comparison to a pimp pimping out this woman in the past. This was like a very old story of this guy named Iceberg, because he was so cold, and he pimped out this woman, and just when like to and he didn't care about her humanity, and he felt the same way, that he was just being milked for
Mhm.
his really culture changing uh, jokes and skits that really pushed what was the dominant narrative at the time. And he went back to Africa, and he just reevaluated, reconnected. And I believe you have a similar experience.
Yeah, I mean, what I did was, so I was born in England, raised in Canada. My parents come from Fiji Islands, which is near Australia and New Zealand, but my grandfathers come from India. And I always struggled with identity of who am I? Am I Indian, Canadian, British, you know, Fijian? So for me, I was, I mean, I can relate to my British, Canadian, and even the Fijian roots because of the closeness of the family and the ties. But I always found India was there and it was present, but I wasn't sure how I fit in. And I mean, it relates back to even the primary and high school I went to. It was predominantly white Canadians. And, you try to fit in to be Canadian. You eat hot dogs, you play road hockey, just you hang out with your friends for Slurpees and things, and you just sort of become Canadian, whatever that
Mhm.
is. But inside of me was also this need to reconnect with my ancestral roots, to realize this place called India, and I had never been. So I decided that I wanted, with my wife, to go to India for the very first time to find my grandfather's house, because really all we had was this faded photograph and very little information. So this is a picture, it's a faded photograph of people from my village. And that's all we had was this picture and the name of the village, where it sat, probably about 6 miles from a town, and it sat in a district. But here's the thing, everything is oral history. So, and as my parents and my relatives are getting older, that information starts evaporating like water on a hot day. And you're trying to capture as much as you can. I was able to ascertain, for example, is my grandfather comes from the state of Punjab, which is landlocked, but he made his way to Calcutta. And in around 2005, 2006, he got on a steamer ship and he was on his way to Argentina because there's cattle ranching there. And he thought, okay, somebody, I guess, filled his mind up that cattle ranching is a great adventure. So he was on his way to Argentina. But the boat stopped in Fiji and he wound up getting off. But this is where the oral histories, you have to fill in blanks because now the history is gone to some extent. Did he get off in Fiji because he had been in a landlocked country? He had had enough of sea travel and said, man, I'm done. I am so done with sea travel. I'm just going to walk off here. Or maybe the second reason, he saw the country, it looked beautiful, and maybe he said, you know what, this looks like paradise. I think I'm going to get off here. Or a third thing, maybe he thought this was Argentina and okay, we've arrived, and he got off the ship left, and he's like, oh, this isn't Argentina. Any number of reasons. But our life after he left India had gone in a different direction. So I decided to try to reconnect because there was a thin thread that connected me back to our village in India. And that thread was about to break because if I don't do this, nobody's going to do this. And our village, our ancestral roots and history will be lost forever. So I went to India, but I wanted to really experience India for not just its magnificence, but for its blemishes, the impurities, because that's everything. You can't just go somewhere and be a tourist and see with your eyes the magnificence of the Taj Mahal or the Golden Temple or the Jama Masjid. Amazing structures, and ignore the poverty and the injustice that lies right at its footsteps. So I was a traveler. I wanted to experience, I wanted to eat the local food. I wanted to meet people and just experience India. So I was a traveler, but I was a foreigner going to a land that should not be foreign to me. And there were times where when we went to the Taj Mahal to experience it, I felt like a tourist because you were observing and seeing what was before you. But the other realization, not just to find my ancestral roots, but was to also find my own identity. And I remember that I was going to go to the Golden Temple, which is the holiest place for all Sikhs. And I'm not religious, but I suddenly realized that morning that I was doing this all wrong, where my life is what I call a thali. A thali in Indian cuisine is a platter with segmented dishes. So uh, here I'm British, Canadian, Indian, and Fijian. Now, I've also played in an Irish military pipe band for 11 years. So there's a bit of chutney on the side that's Irish. So there's all of this, but they're all segmented and separate. But by going to India and waking up at like 4 in the morning on the day I'm going to the Golden Temple, I suddenly had an epiphany that I'm not a thali, I'm khichdi. And khichdi is this rice dish of, so it's rice, but it's all these, you go to your fridge and you take what vegetables you have, you add turmeric and spices and things. It's a blend of flavors. So it made me realize that I'm not a thali, I'm khichdi. And it made me also realize that we're all khichdi. I guess for the listeners who may not understand the rice dish, I mean, if you're North American, it'd be the equivalent of an omelet. If you're Asian, it might be the equivalent of a bibimbap or chow mein. Is embrace the the flavors, embrace the blend, and you can be all of those things. And I'll leave you with this: is that so I went to India in search of my Indian roots or being Indian. I was always Indian. And so I captured all of that in the essence of that in a book I wrote called Lost and Found: Seeking the Past and Finding Myself, because I went in search of my roots and actually, by some unique circumstances, was able to find my grandfather's house with that faded photograph and very little information. But again, it's not so much even just the fact of finding the house, but it was the journey. And equally at the same time, about finding this identity piece. That's what I've captured as well.
That's amazing. Where can we find your book?
So if you go to my website, www.sam-thiara, Thiara, just use my last name, .com. So it's under my writing, or you can even just go to amazon.ca.com and just type my name in and it'll come up there. But it's called Lost and Found: Seeking the Past and Finding Myself.
Well, this was a pleasure, Sam. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.
And I guess we'll leave it with that, guys. Have a good rest of your days.
No, I appreciate that, Adam. And I just leave this with your audience as well, just to say that it goes back to what you started with. I want to end with is that everyone's life is an autobiography. Make yours worth reading. We are all living stories and we all have something to share. And through your podcast, you're giving people a voice. And I appreciate the opportunity to share today, and just the fact that you're giving people an opportunity to be able to share their stories.
Well, thanks for being here. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.